Hello everyone, and welcome to Anomalous Archive, where we post scary stories to help you sleep. Please comment where you are listening to my videos from, since I believe it would be fun for all of us to know. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's reach 10 subscribers until the end of this month. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Cleaning in aisle A9, the radio on my hip crackled. I knew it was my turn, but I still checked the break room to see if anyone was there who I could get to do it for me. Unfortunately, there was no one there. While I had been staring at my phone like a zombie, everyone else had finished their break and left. That meant that after cleaning up a customer's mess, something awaited me. A scolding from my crew leader, Mary. I left the break room and went to the storage room to get a mop and a bucket. Aisle A9 was on the other side of the store, so I knew it wouldn't be long before. Cleaning in aisle A9, the radio boomed more energetically. I ripped it from my belt, thinking of all the things I wanted to say in response, but I swallowed my pride and said, "Understood, I'm on my way." When I arrived there, Mary was standing next to a puddle of something brown and liquid that I didn't want to identify. She had her arms crossed in front of her chest and was tapping her foot. "Have you finally finished your break?" she said, without the slightest hint of interest. "Yes," I said, and placed my bucket next to the puddle, then poured water over it. "Watch out," she said, as some of the water, which had mixed with the brown liquid, splashed onto her shoes. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said, without meaning a word of it. Her face turned bright red and looked like it was about to explode. "You were fired." I found it strange that such a tall woman had such a high-pitched voice when she was angry. "But you can't fire me," I said, leaning on my mop. "You're just a crew leader, not a member of the management." She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again as her face turned even redder. "We'll see," she stammered and turned around, almost slipping on her wet shoe. But she regained her composure and stormed off, while I did everything to avoid bursting into tears of laughter. After that, I finished my disgusting task and took the bucket back to the storage room to empty and rinse it out. I had to rinse the bucket a few times to get rid of the stench. Then I smiled at the thought of how Mary would try to get the dirt out of her shoe. When I was done, I stepped out of the store, where half the lights were off. I breathed a sigh of relief. My shift overlapped with Mary's shift. We arrived a few hours before the store closed, and once it was closed, we were free to restock our merchandise and complete cleaning tasks. The first hour usually consisted of avoiding the cashiers while they counted their registers. After they left, we locked the doors, and then it was just me, Mason, and Robert in the huge, empty store. I won't lie. There were times when my imagination got the better of me as I wandered through the empty aisles of the dimly lit store. The three of us played pranks on each other, but tonight it didn't start that way. Mason didn't feel well and was already talking about going home early. Robert was in his area with headphones in his ears while stocking the shelves. Anyway, I had just pulled my third pallet out of the storage room when something appeared in front of me. I stopped so quickly that the forward momentum of the pallet almost ran me over. "Haha, very funny, guys," I said into my radio. "You can stop now." "What are you talking about?" said Mason. "The one who is hiding near the storage doors can come out now." "I'm not falling for that. I'm in the hardware department, you idiot." "And Robert?" "Now a few laps from me in the auto parts department." Yeah, sure. I mean it seriously. Look towards the hardware." When I looked, I saw a beam of light illuminating the dark ceilings. "Did you see my light?" "Yes, I did," I said slowly, and suddenly didn't want to turn in the direction where whatever it was had just disappeared. "What did you see?" "Oh, it must have just been my imagination," I said, trying to convince myself just as much as him. "Okay, all right, then we can continue." I slowly pushed my pallet truck forward and laid her around the corner. There was nothing there, except for a seemingly endless aisle of shelves. In that moment, I mentally berated myself for having been so easily startled. Then I pushed my pallet truck down the aisle, past the toys and into the household goods section. I forced myself to stare straight ahead and not look into the aisles as I passed by them. But as I passed the last aisle with toys, my pallet truck seemed to get heavier. It was as if one of the wheels got stuck on something. I stopped and went back to check the wheels. There, in the middle on the floor, sat a large stuffed bear about 1.70 meters tall. "Where did you come from, little guy?" I asked. I didn't believe he had been on my pallet, but I lifted him onto the cart to take him to the display board near the entrance. As I turned towards the main aisle, Mason walked back with an empty pallet. "Hey Mason, looks like I found a ride," I said with a smile. "What do you mean?" asked Mason. "Well, I mean this little guy up here," I said, turning around and pointing at the bear. But the bear was gone. "Which guy?" asked Mason, puzzled. "Strange, he must have fallen down." "Haha, I caught you," I said. Mason looked at me strangely and laughed half-heartedly. "Good joke," he said, and pulled his empty pallet back to the storage room. As soon as he was out of sight, I looked around for the bear, but he was nowhere to be found. I shrugged my shoulders. Maybe he really fell down. I pushed my pallet down the aisle to a central point where most of my goods were displayed. Then I took out my cutter, cut open the plastic wrap, and began the tedious task of stocking the shelves. At that moment, I envied Robert for having headphones. I thought I should invest in a set with my hard-earned minimum wage to make this job less boring. While I was putting the goods on the shelves, I heard a noise as if something had fallen from a shelf. At first, I thought Robert had dropped something, but then I realized I hadn't seen Robert's pallet jack in the main aisle. I stepped out and looked up and down the main aisle. Nothing was there. I noticed that I hadn't heard Mason come back with his next load either. Normally, they load the pallets in sections so that we can work systematically. I suspected that Mason's load was the exception. After that, I went back to restocking the shelves and had a strange feeling in the back of my mind. For some reason, I couldn't shake it off. I felt very alone this evening and wondered if someone was playing a trick on me. It didn't really bother me. It helped to make the night shift go by faster. Finally, I had finished my pallet and decided to make the long walk back to the storage room to find the other guys. If they were planning something, I might catch them in the act. I was halfway to the front of the store when I noticed a pallet that was only half empty. I looked around but saw no one. I shrugged and walked past when I noticed red drops on the white floor. They led from the pallet down the hallway. I followed the trail and found a massive red puddle and Robert lying motionless in the middle. For a moment, I froze. Panic seized me until I remembered who was lying there. That was the guy who had made a costume last Halloween that looked like he had been decapitated, complete with splattered blood. I remembered how angry Mary had been when he splattered her. It was the best Halloween ever. Her threats to fire us were the icing on the cake. "Have fun cleaning up," I said as I turned away from the lifeless figure and returned to my pallet. I steered them around the puddle to avoid spreading it further. He should clean that up soon, I thought, before it stains the floor and becomes impossible to remove. That could actually lead to a dismissal if Mary finds out. As I was on my way back to the storage room, I heard footsteps. They weren't loud. I realized that someone was trying to sneak up on me from behind, but they remained quiet. At that moment, I could only imagine Robert sneaking up behind me, ready to jump out from a hallway, covered in fake blood, to scare me. That would have been so great if I had seen it with someone else. But I was a little annoyed. Robert's little prank set us back even further in our stack of tasks, which meant we were still behind on our cleaning duties. Not to mention that he had left a huge mess that I wouldn't clean up, even though the front part was my assigned section for the night. Then I had had enough. I stopped my pallet truck and turned around, just to catch a fleeting glimpse of someone disappearing behind a clothing rack. "All right, Robert," I said. "You caught me. I am now so terribly scared." I looked at the ground, and there were faint red footprints that grew weaker with each step they took, as if someone had followed them and wiped away the red with each step. "Do you really mean that now? I've had enough of this little prank." You will clean all these footprints yourself. I turned around and pulled my pallet truck away in frustration. Little kids, I muttered angrily. I reached the camp and flung the doors open, making them slam loudly against the wall. Oh, I don't care. Maybe Robert will understand now that I'm angry and that he has to stop this nonsense. After that, I drove my pallet truck to the next pallet, but it wouldn't move. I turned the corner to find Mason lying on the floor in a puddle of red liquid. Damn it, you two. Enough with that. We need to get our work done. Then I reached for his arm, but his body didn't move. I pulled his head out of the puddle and then let it drop. He fell with a dull thud. A cold wave washed over me as I pressed my trembling hand against his neck and waited for a pulse. A minute later, I withdrew my hand without feeling anything. I looked at the red liquid on my hand and pulled back. Something at the edge of my field of vision caught my attention. It was the stuffed bear sitting on the floor just outside the pool of blood. There were dark spots on his fur that I hadn't noticed before, and next to him lay a large butcher's knife. My mind refused to believe what I saw. I knew it was impossible, and yet there lay my dead friend in his own blood as proof. Someone must have staged this. It couldn't be real. While these thoughts swirled in my mind, the impossible happened. The bear's head moved. He turned around and looked directly at me. Then his eyes began to glow red. It was as if someone had turned on a set of red LEDs, but I knew that was impossible. These bears were just stuffed. We sold them all the time. I've never seen one with lights in it. Then the next impossible thing happened. He stood up. The soles of his feet were round, so he wobbled a bit as he found his balance. Then he leaned forward and picked up the knife. His hands were only sewn onto the ends of his arms to create the impression of a palm and fingers. When he picked up the knife, the fur wrapped around the handle and lifted it. It was like watching someone pick it up with a sock puppet on their hand. I watched, immobile with fascination, as this thing looked from the knife to me. My mind screamed at me to get up, to do something, anything, instead of just sitting there waiting for this monster with an innocently smiling face to end my life as terribly as it had ended my friend's. I patted my pockets, searching for something useful for defense. All I found was a handful of change and my utility knife. I pushed the blade out as far as possible, a whole 2 centimeters, as a weapon for defense. It was pretty useless, especially against a murderous, psychopathic stuffed bear holding a butcher's knife. I can honestly say that's a thought I could have never thought in my life. My mind pulled me out of my trance and reminded me of the seriousness of the situation. I jumped up, slipped, and almost fell onto the bloody floor before I found my balance and extended the utility knife in front of me. He paused as if he noticed the ridiculousness of my actions and attacked me with the knife. I backed away as the attack came closer and closer to slicing one of my legs. I reached the end of the hallway and ran through the storage doors. As I did that, I felt pain in my right leg, but I didn't stop to examine it. I ran away from the warehouse as fast as I could. Only when I was on the other side of the store did I stop to look at my injury. Blood flowed from my leg, leaving a faint trail. I looked at the sign that read Health and Beauty Products, with an arrow pointing to the section on the other side of the store, a good 100 meters away. Then I opened a roll of paper towels from a shelf and wrapped my leg in an improvised bandage until I could get the right supplies. When I was done, I saw a little brown head peeking around the corner about 12 feet away. In any other situation, he would have been almost cute, but in this one, I knew he was deadly. By running to the other side of the store, I had inadvertently cornered myself. I looked around to see if I could find something to use for defense and grabbed a broomstick from the shelf. I struck the bear, knocking it over, but he got back up before I had finished my swing. He lunged at me, the knife extended, but I managed to hit him with the broom before he could stab me. I didn't wait to celebrate and ran towards the health and beauty products section. When I got there, I quickly found the needed bandage and ran to another part of the store. I was panting and had a stitch. There was no way to maintain this pace. Sooner or later, It would exhaust me so much that I couldn't avoid him anymore, and then I would be done for. I had to hide until I came up with a plan. The office room seemed to be the best place, but they were a dead end. If I hid there, I would surely be trapped. There was no other place I could hide where it couldn't reach me, except maybe the freezer. But what good would it do to hide from this thing and freeze in the process? I had to get out of here. Robert was the one who had locked up, but I didn't know if he kept the keys with him or put them back in the office. There was only one way to find out, and that was near the store entrance. So I looked around and noticed the sports equipment section. I looked everywhere for the deadly stuffed bear, went to the sports section, and picked out a nice baseball bat. Now I at least had a sporting chance. I took a 10-speed bike off the shelf and got on it. As the furball came around the corner, I rode down the aisle and hit it on the head with my racket as I passed by. Then I glanced back to see it spring up and run after me. I shook my head and turned around just in time to avoid running into a display. Immediately, I started pedaling harder. To create distance between him and me, Robert's lifeless body kept coming closer, and I knew I didn't have much time left. I left the bike behind, rolled his lifeless body over, and searched his bag for the keys. When I couldn't find anything, I started to panic. I searched the other bag and found the keys at the same time the knife hit me. My shoulder hurt, and I swung the bat. Fortunately, I hit the knife and pushed it away. The bear jumped on me, and I fell to the ground. Surprisingly, the impact wasn't that strong. He seemed to sense that I wasn't harmed and jumped off me to get the knife. I took the opportunity to get on my bike and ride to the door. Unfortunately, the tire had picked up some blood, and I only managed to go a short distance before losing control and crashing into a beverage display. Bottles of soda falling on me hurt, but not as much as the time I lost until the monster caught up again. I got to my feet, slipped over one last bottle, and ran to the door with the monster close behind me. When I reached the door, I shoved the key into the lock, almost breaking it as I tried to turn it quickly. I prayed as I struggled to open the doors while the monster charged at me with its newly found knife. I slipped through and then focused on closing the doors behind me. They were almost back together when it arrived. It thrust the knife through the narrow gap and narrowly missed my leg as it tried to prevent me from locking the door. The key turned almost all the way, but then it stopped. I struggled to close the door by the last fraction of an inch while the monster continued to stare at me. It didn't work. As long as the knife prevented the doors from closing completely, I couldn't lock them. Then I devised a brilliant, yet foolish plan in my mind. I flung the doors open and surprised the bear for a moment. Then I struck, grabbed the knife, and simultaneously lunged at the monster. It staggered back, and I held the knife tightly as it lost its grip. Then I stared at the knife for a moment, threw it away, and closed the doors as the monster sprang up and charged. I was able to lock and bolt them before it could do anything to stop me. Even now, in relative safety, I wondered what the thing was and why it had done that. It stopped banging on the door. It was hypnotic. I stared motionless into the glowing red. After a minute, I shook myself, unlocked the outer door, and stepped into the cool night air. I took a deep breath, felt safer than before, but at the same time had the feeling that my world was a little more frightening because such things existed and no one would believe me. Then I checked my injuries as I limped to the employee area of the parking lot, which of course was the farthest from the store. When I opened my car, I noticed that 3 other cars were still there. Mason's and Robert's cars would eventually be taken away. I mourned the loss of my friends and wondered if I would be blamed for their deaths. At that moment, I was too tired to think further about the future. I just wanted to go home and lie down in bed. I didn't even think about calling the police. A final night in my bed was all I wanted. Then my gaze fell on the 3rd car. It was Amy's. She should have been long gone. Yet here she was sitting in her car. I limped over to see if everything was all right. The closer I got, the more I saw that she had her eyes closed, but her mouth was moving. I could hear a faint murmuring, as if she were humming a melody or something like that. Then I knocked on the window, and her eyes opened so quickly that I took half a step back. She looked at me, and her face went from calm to pure horror. Then she started the engine and sped out of the parking lot, almost running over my foot. For a moment, I thought about her strange behavior as I fell into my car and tried to start the engine. As I continued to try in vain to start the engine and stared at the road ahead of me, I suddenly noticed movement in the rearview mirror. My heartbeat quickened as I saw the eyes of the stuffed bear in the back seat slowly begin to glow red. The car did not move. The lights began to flicker, and the radio started to emit strange, distorted sounds. Panic seized me as I realized I was trapped, that the stuffed bear still had an eerie power over me. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper. They were the voices of my deceased colleagues, trapped in an unrelenting chorus of terror. "You can't leave," they whispered, as the car was shaken by invisible hands. The road, which had just seemed so safe and bright, began to change, to twist and turn as if it had a life of its own. The stuffed bear in the back seat slowly but surely began to show its crackling laughter. The eyes shone brighter and brighter until the entire vehicle was filled with their red glow. I screamed in fear and desperately tried to escape the car, but it felt as if invisible shackles were holding me in place. The road disappeared before my eyes. The surroundings turned into a jumble of nightmares. I heard the voices of my friends growing louder and more painful, as if they were coming from the depths of my own psyche. In that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped in an endless nightmare from which there was no waking. And then, as the darkness threatened to engulf me, I heard a whispering voice right next to me. "You can never escape," whispered the stuffed bear with its glowing red eyes. But this time it was not a bear's head, but that of a stranger. This madman had removed the headpiece of his costume to reveal his true face to me before my death, and his eyes still glowed red. A cold breath brushed over my neck, and I felt something unknown and eerie burrowing into my soul. The last words I heard were a cruel laugh that seemed to come out of nowhere, and then everything went black.